We're going to get a fresh look this morning at how the U.S. presidential election is shaping up. Early voting continues in a handful of states, including Pennsylvania, so key. A number of election forecasts point to voters in that battleground state as the ones who will decide the winner of the White House November 5th. Now, those forecasts are working with some new data this week, including polls from the New York Times and Siena, Quinnipiac University, and CNN. And we have CNN senior political data reporter Harry Enten back with us. He's the host of CNN's Margins of Error podcast as well. He's in New York. So enjoyed our conversation last time and learned so much, Harry. I'm really delighted you can come back again this morning. So why don't we talk about that? It was not quite 2 weeks ago that we last spoke. What's changed? How tight are things now?
Look, they continue to be very, very tight. Look, I don't know if I said it last time I was with you, but this is the closest race this century. In fact, in the national polling, it's the closest, consistently close race since 1960. And I can tell you I'm not anywhere near that age so that I can remember that matchup. But look, I think that we have a real difference, right? You have those national polls, right, that kind of span. There's a smorgasbord, you might say, of results. There's more blue leads than there are red leads, more leads for Kamala Harris than for Donald Trump. But on average, we're talking only about 2 to 3 points. And in those swing states that are oh so important, given that it's a race to 270 electoral votes, it continues to be very, very tight. Donald Trump probably doing a little bit better in the Sunbelt states in the South. You know, your Georgias, your North Carolinas, your Arizonas, while Kamala Harris doing a little bit better in those northern battleground states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. But the bottom line here as I sit with you, tight, tight, tight.
Talk about that national trend, if you would. And you mentioned the Electoral College, and I'm wondering if you can give us in Canada just a bit of a electoral math 101
Sure.
so we understand this, because there was a lot of attention to that Ipsos Reuters national poll that showed Harris with that 5-point lead. And that was everyone talking about how necessary that is to have that wide gap in terms of popular support because of what happens with the Electoral College. So what do we need to keep in mind there?
Yeah, I think the thing you need to keep in mind is recent history, right? Al Gore got more votes than George W. Bush back in 2000, but lost to George W. Bush because George W. Bush had more votes in states that totaled at least 270 electoral votes, right? We don't go off the popular vote. Your southern neighbors do not. The same was true in 2016, right? Hillary Clinton got more national popular votes than Donald Trump, but Donald Trump got more votes in states totaling at least 270 electoral votes. The question is, how does the popular vote translate to the Electoral College? I think most analysts would agree that Kamala Harris cannot just win the popular vote. She has to win it by a wide enough margin in order to defeat Donald Trump in the Electoral College. The question is, how wide does she need to win that popular vote by? You mentioned that 5 points. I think it's a little bit less than that, right?
Okay.
I think if you look at analysis, you look at the swing state polls, I think it's probably closer to 2 or 3 points. I even saw one analysis from my dear friend Nate Cohn at the time suggesting it might actually be closer to 1.5 points this morning. So when you look at those national polls and you see Kamala Harris with, let's say, a 2 to 3 point advantage, nationally speaking, I think that translates to an Electoral College race that, to be gosh darn honest, is so close. You know, I like to project things. I like to forecast things. If you told me that the popular vote was 2 to 3 points as the polling average is today, I wouldn't have the closest gosh darn idea who would win in the Electoral College.
Really? Okay. So, well, we'll keep that in mind. It is just shaping up to be just such a fascinating thing to track. And it has us looking, and you'll know this so much better, at the 2nd congressional district in Nebraska. Is it right that it could all come down to one district in Nebraska and how it doesn't go winner take all in that particular part of the state? Why is Nebraska so important at this point?
I love the electoral rules of our country. You know, it's not a national election. It's 50 state elections. And both Maine and Nebraska decided in their infinite wisdom that they would award 2 electoral votes to the statewide winner and then 1 electoral vote to the winner of each of the congressional districts. And in Nebraska specifically, the 2nd congressional district is around Omaha, and that district has been leaning blue in recent cycles. And so when you put together the electoral math and, you know, you punch the keys maybe on the magic wall here at CNN, you could go do it on any website if you're up there in Canada. And what you would see is if, let's say, you give Kamala Harris all the blue states that she won last time around, except for those, so let's say, 6 key battleground states, we're talking Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all right? You take those 6 off the board. And then you say, okay, I'm going to give Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia to Donald Trump. I'm going to also allow him to keep North Carolina. But then I'm going to give Kamala Harris Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. That would get her to exactly 269 electoral votes, one short. Then you add in that 2nd congressional district in Nebraska, and that gets her to exactly 270 electoral votes. That's why that congressional district is so important that Kamala Harris carries that. Because if she does, she can win with a minimum map without needing to win any of those Sunbelt battleground states just by winning those in the North.
I mean, how likely is that scenario in your estimation, that it could all come down to that one district and that one electoral college vote?
I think it is more likely than if you had told me 5 years ago that I would be on the CBC with you. I think that it's I think it's actually not that far-fetched of a scenario. People talk about, we get a 269 tie. That is far more far-fetched than getting Kamala Harris to exactly 270 electoral votes. In fact, if you were basically looking at the polls right now, that, honestly, is pretty close to the median outcome. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's definitely quite plausible. It's definitely the minimum map for Kamala Harris, and one that when I've appeared on the air here at CNN and thrown up that map on the screen, it's one I've certainly shown a lot.
Okay. You've also been talking about demographics, and I want maybe for our last question this time around to talk about that, how you found it noteworthy that she's holding her own within white voters, the demographic there, and Donald Trump, obviously demographics key to his win. Black voters and Hispanic voters, he's doing well with those voting contingencies and constituencies. How do you think that's going to translate as we look at these last weeks, and where should we watch their focus on those particular voting groups?
I love when the questions sync together, right? And this has everything to do with the electoral map. If you look at the electoral map, right, you look at those Sunbelt battleground states I was mentioning, right? We'll go Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. Those group of states are far more diverse than those northern battleground states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Down in the southeast with Georgia and North Carolina, higher African-American population than the country as a whole. In the southwest, Nevada, Arizona, higher Hispanic populations than the country as a whole. And that, I think, is part of the reason why we're looking potentially at that 270 to 268 map, because Donald Trump is doing considerably better than he did 4 years ago, both among black voters and Hispanic voters. Now, Harris is still holding those groups, but Donald Trump is improving with them, while Harris is holding her own, if not slightly improving upon Joe Biden's margins among white voters, and that is why she is holding on in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. If those trends continue, we're much more likely to head towards that 270 to 268 map, the closest election of my lifetime.
Can't wait to our next conversation. Hope you'll come back soon, Harry. Thank you so much for this morning again.
Of course.
And we'll be watching. CNN senior political data reporter, our guest again, Harry Enten.